I actually said that one of the biggest problems is that, as you said, these universities are funded by the federal government rather than having what you Americans have on the, like,
Yeah,
I mean, if you're going to have public education, I think it should be much more accountable to local taxpayers, like the community colleges are over there.
yeah, we
Uh,
have those.
and there should be a little more, uh, what you say, flexible regarding the strategic needs of the economy, if you will. Um, One of the main problems is that, as you said, the national universities, they are called national autonomous universities because they are funded directly by the federal government, but
Yeah.
they are autonomous. That means
Yes.
they are self-ruling, based on a system of triple government. Each of these universities is headed by by a representative sort of organism made up of representatives of the student body, the teachers body, and in some cases it's like the non-teacher employees, like administrative ones, and in some cases it's like alumni, graduates. But for the most part, it's just the teachers unions who get uh, the most representation and the ones who de facto rule the schools.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 226. Returning is Eloy Vera Beltrán. He is a journalist and law student in Argentina. He's in Bahia Blanca, which means White Bay. We're going to talk about what's going on in Argentina right now, specifically with these student protests. Javier Milei has decided to audit the universities, and this is really upsetting some people. Not surprising. That great bastion of socialism in every country, of course, is the elite college campus, and they're upset that there's a capitalist in doing capitalist things now, and we're going to see what's happening with that. How are you, Eloy?
Hi, Chris. I'm okay. I'm a little sneezy too, a little allergic. That's how I've been doing some
Yes.
traveling, but I'm okay.
Well, that's cool. It's certainly been a very interesting 8 months. 8 months, or well, 10 months now, but we've had basically 8 or 9 months of budget surpluses. The inflation is now down to under 4%, and it looks like there's really getting to be some positive signs in the economy right now. I think this bodes well for next year. But I wanted to get, you're in law school, so what law school are you at right now?
It's called Universidad Nacional del Sur. It's the National University of the South, here in Bahia Blanca, which is, for the audience, smack in the middle of Argentina in the Atlantic coast. So it's sort of the main university for basically all of the South, Patagonia,
Yeah,
the south of the province of Buenos Aires, etc.
yeah. What percentage of the population of the country goes to college generally? It seems like to me in America, there's been this dogma that everybody has to go to college now, but is it that way down there or not?
Um, yeah, university is a little bit mythologized here. We, for good and for bad, have this sort of pride that we, unlike other Latin American countries, Argentina is a middle class country. So a lot of what you consider status symbols of the middle class, like owning a small business or going to college, are considered sort of like mandatory. We have uh, right now around 10% of the population actively going to school, and at any given time in the last couple of years, we have something like 20% of the population that have
Okay.
gone to school and completed successfully. We have a little problem that a lot more people go to school than actually complete their studies. That's one of the main inefficiencies about our national university system. But yeah, it's a sort of we call it a sacred cow. It's one of the
Yeah.
foundational components of the Argentinian mythos. Going to college.
That's something everywhere. You have certain students that start and have ones that don't finish. I mean that's one thing the college degree does show is that you set a goal and you actually completed your goal. Whether or
Mm.
not it's actually gives you that knowledge, but at least you said I'm going to do X and I did X. But uh, what are some of the prestigious schools in Argentina?
The main one is the University of Buenos Aires,
Okay.
UBA. It usually ranks amongst the best in Latin America and even makes it to some international rankings. Lots of people in the UBA go to study abroad for their master's degrees or their doctor's degrees. Um, and some people who study in the less prestigious universities of the interior of the country end up doing their uh, postgraduate studies in the UBA. Then you have some specific schools that are prestigious in some specific field. For example, my school is moderately prestigious in law, for example, which is what I'm
Yes.
doing, or in agrarian subjects because the agrarian nature of this part of the country. We have the National Technical School, which is good for engineering, sort of technical careers. But
Yes.
basically, all of the discourse around, and then you have the University of Rosario and Cordoba, which are the two other big urban centers. Cordoba is the oldest school, some 411 years old. It was founded by the Spanish during colonial times. But all of the discourse around education and public education, especially, is often uh, very polarized between UBA, which is like the main one, and it
Yeah.
functions basically like its own system, and all the others, which are sort of like a block.
Yeah. So are most of them government or public, or are some of them private? Some of them might be
All
affiliated
of
with
the ones I
churches.
mentioned, all of the ones I mentioned are national universities, which are the public universities.
So
Then
they're
we
actually,
do have some private ones, like mostly Catholic schools.
yeah,
UCA is the Universidad Católica Argentina, Catholic universities in the main provinces. And then in the last couple of decades, there have been popping up a couple non-Catholic ones, especially Universidad di Tella,
yeah,
UTDT, which is like the closest one to the American model of higher education, and UCEMA, UCMA, which is an Austrian school. It was founded like an economics research for Austrian school economists, and now it's specializes in business degrees.
yeah. UCEMA. Yeah, that's the
Yeah, I'm.
yeah, yeah, that's the University of CEMA. Yeah, I've heard of that one. It's definitely a. It has some links to the University of Chicago, which is also considered one of the more free market schools up here in the USA, and of course Milton Friedman and,
Yeah,
as they call them, the Chicago boys helped Pinochet. So for better or for worse.
yeah.
Yeah, we kind of have something like that here too. When you say they're national, so actually a lot of the colleges are operated by the federal government, because in America that's almost hardly the case at all. They're usually
No,
state universities and
yeah,
not federal here.
yeah, no. I'm doing some plugging of my. I wrote an article a couple of weeks ago about the university issue.
Yeah,
It's in my Substack. If anyone
yeah,
cares to visit my Twitter and find it, I actually said that one of the biggest problems is that, as you said, these universities are funded by the federal government rather than having what you Americans have on the, like,
yeah,
I mean, if you're going to have public education, I think it should be much more accountable to local taxpayers, like the community colleges are over there.
yeah. We
Uh,
have those.
and there should be a little more, uh, what you say, flexible regarding the strategic needs of of the economy, if you will. Um, One of the main problems is that, as you said, the national universities, they are called national autonomous universities because they are funded directly by the federal government, but
Yeah.
they are autonomous. That means
Yes.
they are self-ruling, based on a system of triple government. Each of these universities is headed by a representative sort of organism made up of representatives of the student body, the teachers body, and in some cases it's like the non-teacher employees, like administrative ones, and in some cases it's like alumni, graduates. But for the most part, it's just the teachers unions who get uh, the most representation and the ones who de facto rule the schools.
Yeah, here in America, I mean, I think we have what I would call 5 national universities, and they're all military academies.
Yeah. Well, that was an issue here in Argentina because a couple of years ago, during the administration of the Kirchner government, they did establish a military university. We had military schools like war academies and so on, but they like unified them into a university, and that was an issue because
Yep.
again, the constitution requires universities to be autonomous and self-ruling,
Yeah.
and you don't want your military to be autonomous and self-ruling. You want it to be accountable to the civilian command.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but here, we have more what would be the equivalent of provincial. Most universities here would be, you know, owned by the provinces.
Yeah.
So, and you occasionally have some more local ones, like even some city colleges. But yeah, it's not really. And I would say, on the whole, America has a lot of colleges to begin with. I mean, I don't know. I mean, do you have a lot of big schools down there, or do you have a bunch of little schools, or is it kind of a mix of both? Maybe,
Mostly
and by
little.
big school, by big school, I mean 40 or 50,000. Small school, I mean 1 or 2,000.
Yeah, mostly small regional schools, 1 or 2 thousand, because of this thing that universities are self-ruling. They are mostly used to give like political favors to specific sectors. It's basically a specific teachers union carving out a small fiefdom for themselves in a specific region. So there are cities which have like a university only servicing like 1,000, 2,000, maybe 3,000 students from the surrounding area. Uh, and that was one of the problems, for example, with the military university I was mentioning,
Yeah.
UNDEF, that uh, you establish these sort of black fiscal boxes that the national state has to provide funding for and has to budget for, but they actually can't be controlled or audited by the national government. um, and they are like carved away from society in a way, because again, the school population is pretty insular and pretty unified in their sectorial interests, and they usually act like sort of strongholds of political parties, which are the ones who actually run the students and teachers unions during the internal university elections.
Certainly so. And as you pointed out, you have some specialized university colleges. You have the med schools, you have medical schools, you have the law schools. You probably even got a few veterinarian schools, and other specialties like that, or schools for dentists, or schools for, and and engineering, and of course, and I also assume that the more schools focused on engineering are probably 2/3 male, but I don't know. But that's that way here in America. But so you've got this system that's. So what exactly is? But you're saying that there's a lot of unions of professors down there, or unions of the, and I suppose they're almost all. What? I suppose the typical university professor down there might have voted for Massa, but they even more likely voted for Miriam Bregman last year.
It largely depends on uh, on what field you're talking about. The humanities and social science faculties are usually dominated by the hard left, the Communist Socialist Party, Miriam Bregman, as you mentioned. The Peronist Party, of course, has a strong foothold in many bureaucratic adjacent careers, lawyers, accountants, etc. And some of the more well-connected middle class, sort of like independent professional careers are more controlled by the UCR, the Radical Union. It's a sort of center-left party, which it's a little bit schizophrenic because sometimes they say they are opposition to Milei, sometimes they say they are not. One of Milei's ministers is from the party, but one of the main candidates against him for next year's elections also is from the party. So it mostly depends not only on the career, but actually the geography. That's one other of the issues about these schools being autonomous. From the 90s onwards, governments started creating new small universities that they could give professorships and subsidies to sympathizers. So, for example, the UCR, this middle class center left party, used to be hegemonic in the UBA, in the capital. So what the Peronist government of Carlos Menem did was found a bunch of little universities all around the metro area of the capital to sort of surround them with Peronist allied universities. Then when the radicals came back to power, they started creating universities in some of the urban centers of the interior, etc. So you have this cycle where every government is incentivized to, or every new administration is incentivized to create new universities in sort of like gerrymandering to create new corporations that are friendly to you and which you can use as uh, funding opportunities for your political party. Because again, most of this is about money. Every university has the right to receive money from the national government, and the national government doesn't have the opportunity to revise where that money goes or how it's spent.
Yeah, and the UCR is the Union Civica Radical. So,
Yeah.
or the Radical Civic Union. Yeah. So that's where we ended up. So in some, yeah. So there's, looks like they're trying to stick some people in some areas. Do most college students? I mean, do they usually go pretty far away from home, or do they usually stay pretty close to home? Or I suppose it depends on
Um,
their demographics. I mean,
in large urban centers like Buenos Aires, Cordoba, Rosario,
yeah,
no. They usually stay home, and sort of like in America, people start staying with their parents longer and longer. Um, then you have the problem of transportation because these urban centers are very sprawling, and it's usually like
yeah,
2 hours to get to university, 2 hours to get back. It's then in the interior, where you have like pretty small cities and a bunch of little towns and villages all over,
yeah,
it's more common to see people like traveling maybe 600 kilometers. I think that's like 800 miles for university. So you actually have to uh, buy an apartment or rent an apartment or try to get roommates. So it's much more like the campus experience. Actually, the campus model of American universities, where you have like a small student district or student town carved away from the main town, is much more prominent here in the interior, where people flock from all over to attend university, than in the large urban centers, where you usually will find that the university facilities are spread all over the city. So maybe the Faculty of Medicine is over here. In another quarter or district, you will have the law school, etc.
yeah. You sometimes have that happen. You know, where at least, well, I don't know that much about where when I lived in Columbus, Ohio. You have one neighborhood where undergrads would live, and then the graduate students would go live in this neighborhood. Then the professors had this other town.
Yeah.
it was all kind of interesting how that worked out. But definitely, you live in a city, and everybody who had nothing to do with the college might not ever go into that neighborhood, and people who are going to college might not ever leave that neighborhood. Of course, a lot of them don't have cars or anything. Is it pretty subsidized down there? I mean, are there government guaranteed loans, or does everybody pretty much have to pay their own way, or if mom and dad pays for it?
Well, another thing about national universities is that they are free. They are tax funded. Not only are they free for people who attend, but actually a few decades ago, uh, the government started implementing, of the previous government, a couple governments ago, a couple administrations ago, started implementing the unrestricted access policy, which basically means not only universities can't charge their students to attend, but they can't even like establish examinations or some other prerequisites for who gets in and who can't. So it means during the first year of any particular degree, you will have hundreds, maybe even thousands of students flocking to the city. Eventually, some of them will change careers. They will move to private universities, which are sort of like faster and easier and more well connected to the private sector, or some just won't finish school at all. Um, Several universities use this to their advantage because they can enroll huge quantities of students and say, "Oh, I have like 2,000 people coming to my school this year, so I need money for 2,000 extra students." But maybe like 100 or 200 of them will actually go all the way uh, to complete their degree. So that's one of the issues. Yes, it's completely subsidized. Then you have extra costs, transportation, lodging, especially for those of us who come from the interior of the country, uh, subsidized food, and for or printing paper, books, those
Yeah,
sort of things. The government provides extra subsidies for, and some of them are more well controlled for the so that not everyone can use them. I, for example, don't. I can afford my books, so I don't have that subsidies. Um, but in other cases, they are also not very well controlled, or they are given out by the universities themselves rather than the government. So again, it's just one other fiscal black box that the government puts money in, and you can't really see who gets their hands into it.
yeah, it definitely sounds like there's some corruption here. I know, at least in America, also a college textbook will probably cost triple of what it would normally what a similar book would cost if it wasn't a college textbook. Is that the case down there too, or not? Although that's not that big an expense for students, but it's definitely an expense that some students hit, which is why there's a big market. Also, people will go back to that bookstore and sell their books back to the store,
Yes.
and then the
Yeah,
store will resell them as used.
yeah, that definitely happens here. I have resold my old books. People also print a lot. Universities usually also run their own bookstores or editorial fronts, so it can get cheaper in some specific fields. In some like mine, which is law, which is constantly being updated, and there are some specialized bookstores, is a little more expensive. But then again, one of the biggest debates over here is that one of the points of having a public education system supposedly is to help poorer people get into the schools and progress and have social mobility in their lives. But actually, most of the people who end up coming to school, and the vast majority of the people who actually end up winning or earning their degrees, are upper middle class. And these are people who are like me, who aren't struggling. We can afford the books, we can afford the apartment, we can afford. I didn't ever have to live with roommates, for example.
Oh wow,
So
yeah,
there's a huge social disparity over there. Like one of the main issues I would say is that not only that this is taxpayer money that is being used somewhat spuriously, but also that it's being used inefficiently. Like if you want to subsidize the poor and have social mobility, what you are actually doing is subsidizing the upper middle class so that they don't have to pay their private school.
That's what often happens. You end up subsidizing the upper middle class. And at least up until recently, it sounded like anybody from a foreign country could go to school in Argentina and the government would pay for it.
Yes, our constitution actually has a provision that any foreign person who gets residence in Argentina gets the same civil rights. Obviously, not political rights; they can't vote, but they get the same civil rights as a citizen. This was done back in the day to encourage immigration because we are still a very unpopulated country.
Yes.
Um, like we're the size of India, but we only have 40,000, no, 40 million inhabitants. Most of them
Yes.
concentrated in a few cities. And I mean that's not necessarily wrong. I'm quite pro-immigration myself. I think it actually encouraged a lot of immigration back in the day. And it's good for people to be subject to the rule of law, to know they will be able to do business and work and not be arrested without due process, etc. The thing is, when you start to reinterpret the word right or civil right to mean the government giving you money and services, a lot of people come from like uh, close by countries, Bolivia, Peru. They get their degrees here and they go back to their countries. Um, and and one of the issues is they don't reciprocate for Argentina. So if an Argentinian wants to go to study, say in Brazil or in Peru, we do have to pay for our
Yeah.
degrees there.
So yeah. So I would think that would really could possibly, I would think that maybe some of these schools in some of these other countries would also be screaming and said like, "You're taking our best students away." I mean, what would the University of San Marcos in Peru say? About. I mean, I'm mentioning it because it is the oldest university in the Western Hemisphere. What would they say? Hey, we want these students here. We don't want them to go to Buenos Aires to go to school.
Yeah, yeah, we end up sort of like being this the grand tour of Europe, this thing that young aristocrats did back in the day, like in the 19th century, where they would have a few years off to go tour the exotic countries in Europe. That sort of happens here. The elite youths from all over South America end up coming in Argentina, and the Argentinian state subsidizes some specific countries. For example, we subsidize a lot of Portuguese speaking students from Africa, like from Zimbabwe, for example, or
Zimbabwe is not
Mozambique.
Portuguese, but yeah,
No, Mozambique. Sorry,
Mozambique, Angola. Yeah.
Mozambique and Angola. So they come here rather than going to Brazil because geopolitical reasons, etc.
Yeah.
So the one of the justifications usually given uh, to sustain this system where foreigners can come in is, well, they come, they do pay their sales tax, and they like absorb some of the Argentinian culture, and maybe in the long run that will end up benefiting Argentina. That might be true, but then again, why an elite foreign national should be prioritized in a public taxpayer-funded system over uh, Argentinian poor citizens?
Well, some of them will say, well, we'll subsidize their school, but then they'll make more money and then they'll pay that money back in taxes eventually. And I don't know if that works or not, but it's certainly not guaranteed. Uh, I guess the jump from Portuguese to Spanish probably isn't that difficult.
No.
Okay, yeah.
No, we are actually, I was just this last week on Concepción del Uruguay, which is a town on the border between uh, Argentina, Uruguay, and Brazil, and it's a binational school, so you have a lot of students from all over the three countries.
Yeah.
And in some cases, it works. Like, for example, in Uruguay, they own, which is like Argentina but small. It's Uruguay's to Argentina what Belgium is to France. Uh, they do have publicly funded school, and it's free at the point of entry. You can go and study without paying your tuition. But then the state will start charging extra tax on graduates, on alumni, to have them pay back the cost of their education.
Yeah.
So that's another system that has been proposed and rejected over here.
Yeah. What is the student life usually like? I mean, you go back 50 or 60 years, college dorm rooms were uh, maybe 4 meters by 2 meters, and you'd have two single beds in them, and you'd have two students sharing that room, and then they might have a desk for each student, and then there'd be maybe a collective, like a collective bathroom for the whole floor. And now, from what I'm hearing, is a lot of colleges are almost becoming like nice hotels or something. What's the college like? What's the college experience like down there? Is it still pretty cheap, or is it still more this luxurious way that it is now in America?
No, again, you find this division between people in the large cities, like UBA. You go to school, but you still live with your parents, and the school is all around the city, so you still sort of do your normal everyday life. Maybe you still hang out with your preschool friends, preschool, like your pre-university friends. I mean,
Yeah,
while here in the interior, you will have something more like what you mentioned, American college used to be. People
yeah,
still rent dorm rooms because you have to come in from a town like maybe 200 kilometers, 3,300 miles from outside the city.
yeah,
And there's a lot of, I don't want, maybe I made it sound like, oh, national public education is all cozy, upper middle class. You still have a lot of austerity and stress baked within the university experience. That's why so many people, for example, have subsidized food or subsidized transport. They live in shared apartments, etc. Um, but you definitely see this polarization as as you get older and you advance on your career. Uh, some of the poorer students start like falling through the cracks of the system because they can't afford to be in school. They have to go to the labor market, or they just don't have the baseline education level, which is another problem. Primary and secondary education here in Argentina are very bad, so people don't get to university with that high of a educational level to begin with. And some of the people who actually do get to the top and actually end up earning their degrees are the most well off, who didn't have to go through that sort of austerity measures, or maybe even only do that as a sort of rite of passage, like, oh, that those were my university years, so of course I ate at the school luncheon the hospital food they gave you rather than the nice food I could afford, but because that's like part of the cultural
yeah.
experience.
Also, there was also a time in America where the culture on university campus was not particularly permissive. I mean, go back to the 1960s. The students would have to be back at their dorms at 11 p.m. On one side there was the dorm for the men, on the other side there was the dorm for the women, and you did not go in the other one. It went both ways, and now it's got to be much more permissive. I'd say it probably promotes a lot more sexual openness. Would you say it's still pretty puritanical down there? Or has it also gotten pretty wide open like it is in America now? Although in America, it definitely depends on the school.
Yeah, no, I'd say it's pretty wide open because even when you have this sort of campus system where students will live very close by, they're still quite integrated into like civilian life, let's say. So you don't find this sort of regimented or almost monastic lifestyle where you are like
Yeah.
always accountable to the dorm supervisors.
Yeah.
It was quite puritanical back in the day during the military dictatorship, like in the 70s, especially because like society was still very Catholic and very conservative here in Argentina around that time. But since the return to democracy, universities have become this sort of bastion of like progressive values, and and again, when you have unrestricted access and you can't control or put a limit on how many students will come in every single year, you just can't control all of them. So the university is not that into like policing the private behavior of students.
Yeah, that's true. And one of the things too, America also has a lot of these. I'd almost call them fake departments, fake degrees. Like we have things like women's studies and departments that really are just designed, I think, to push these agendas. You might have African American studies or Native American studies. I don't know. Maybe down there you have Incan studies uh, or Native or what are some of the tribes down there, or
The Mapuche,
indigenous Amazon studies or something like that. I mean, do you have these departments that really just kind of degrees where they push ideologies and you end up with degrees that really don't help you at all in the real world, unless you want to be a professor, of course.
yeah. Um, you see a lot of that on in postgrad mostly. Like you will have a master's degree in, like say, women's studies,
Yeah,
or specializing in some particular indigenous tribe, or there has been from the progressive side of the aisle a movement to sort of install the African Argentinian discourse in recent years, which is funny because we don't have that big of an African descended population, because most of them were like sort of assimilated into the bloodstream, so to speak.
yes,
Like we only recently had immigration from Africa, but that's voluntary immigration, not slavery. And yeah, much of these things are done to cater specifically to international academia. These are degrees that maybe don't have, but again, if we are a country with doesn't have a lot of slave descendants, what good is it for you or for the country if you are specialized in slave descendant affairs? But it will serve you to seek a tenure, say, in an American university or in a European university,
yeah,
which are more interested. But actually, one of the problems with university here is that, as I said, that's in post-grad level.
yeah,
In at the graduate level, actually, you have the opposite problem where you don't have over specialized degrees, but rather we still follow the sort of medieval Spanish Catholic system where you have extremely long and dilated careers. Like if you have a history degree, you will spend like I think I don't want to lie, but I think in my university the average time it takes for a history student to complete their degree is 10.5 years, and you will be required to have like encyclopedic knowledge about
yeah.
every single subject you study. So we
Do,
don't have the system of specializations and electives that you
yeah,
have over there in America, and people will end up having all of this useless knowledge. Not useless because it's not worth it. Maybe, I don't know. I
yeah,
like Roman history, but if you are going to specialize in, I don't know, Spanish colonial history, you don't need to know all the other stuff. Like we live in a over specialized world with international division of labor, and people
yeah,
get caught in the system studying a lot of things they're not going to implement in their everyday lives.
yeah. So when you say 10 years to get that degree, do you mean a PhD or just an undergrad?
Uh, the what's the undergrad and graduate degree, like the what would be a bachelor's and a master's are unified over here.
Okay.
So it's one single 7 or
Okay.
maybe 5, 7, 8 year
So yeah.
process. Right now, some universities, and this is to the favor, like even in the worst cases, the universities know they need to compete with the private universities, which are a little more updated on this. So some universities, like mine, for example, have started issuing what they're called intermediate degrees. So in your way to doing your whole degree, which is the equivalent of a master's in America, you will get like halfway in
Yeah.
the equivalent of a bachelor's degree. So
Yes. Yeah, they have. I mean, bachelor's degrees in America are 4 years. I think sometimes when you have associate degrees that are 2 years. A master's or a PhD, it's really hard to tell, and it also depends on how easily they can schedule them. And it's not unusual, for a student, possibly to get a bachelor's degree and then take a year off or something like that too. It's all that stuff happens. It's just, and of course, study abroad. I know people who do that too. So I guess we want to get down to what's going on here. So Milei is, since we've got an overview of what the colleges are like in this country, but Milei wants to audit the university. So what exactly is he doing to audit the universities? That sounds like he's cutting expenses, at least, or trying to cut expenses and making sure the money is at least being used efficiently. What can you tell us about that?
yeah, as part of the spending cuts he's doing over the last 10 months, he restricted the so to speak funnel of money to the national university system. You will have this sort of ritual, not only with universities but with every sector of the economy, where every few months they will have what you call paritarias, which are collective bargaining situations where the employees and the employers would get together with the national government and they will negotiate a new inflation adjusted salary scheme. And usually universities are uh, expecting to get budget updates or actualizations every few months. But Milei has cut back on that, um, saying we're not going to give the universities whatever money they ask until they can prove that that's the money they need. Again, based on how many students go to your school, how many students actually do finish, what are you spending on each of them, how do we know that this money isn't being stolen away by the political parties in the university councils, and why do so many universities have so many administrative staff? Like why the university, my university, for example, has a nightclub and sports clubs. Like the universities spend a lot of money in things that aren't necessarily related to education,
Yeah.
which again, American universities do it too because they're basically hedge funds, but they're privately owned. In the case of national university in Argentina, it's taxpayer money. So Milei wants to have a complete audit where you can know how much money do universities spend per student and on what are they spending that money on. So in the last budget, the budget for this year, he contemplated a much lower ceiling for spending on higher education. And then again, the opposition a couple of weeks ago tried to pass a law to basically bypass the president's budget and establish a special budget for the universities. I should say that the two main parties of the opposition, the UCR, the Radical Party, and the Peronist Party, are the ones who control most of the universities. But very narrowly, because of the majorities needed in both chambers of the legislature, Milei actually managed to veto that legislation. So now they will have to discuss the university funding in the next budget for the year 2025, and presumably the government will ask some more substantial audits from the universities, not internal audits. With some universities, every couple of years will publish, oh, we're spending so much money and we have so many students, we are doing this and that thing, but a more detailed uh, account of every single, I don't know, I don't know accounting lingo in English, but every single expense the universities are undertaking.
Yeah, so that will be very, one thing again note I notice in American colleges is that there's always construction work going on someplace, and
Mhm.
it just tells me, I said they must have. In some cases, they probably don't need it. And it's just like, okay, but they must have all this money because they're spending it all just on bricks and mortar, which might make the experience nicer, but it doesn't really improve things all that much. Uh, are do the professor? I know in America there's that tenured professor who's basically impossible to fire. Do you have that issue down there as well, where they do it to encourage academic freedom, but it
Yeah,
ends up in some cases freezing people into jobs, and they're often not doing their jobs, and in many cases not really teaching at all.
yeah, exactly. Just quickly, I wanted to comment on the brick and mortar thing you said over there, because we have the exact same problem. My university is relatively efficient with their funds. They're building a new campus. But one of the problems you will have is that, for example, the UVA, the most prestigious school in the country, one of the best in Latin America,
Yeah.
uh, it's hell to try to take your classes there. Like there's leaks on the roofs. The buildings are like 30 or 40 years old without renovations,
Oh wow.
uh, barely any security measures. So that's one of the things. Like, if you need all this money and you spend all this money per student, why are your facilities such?
True.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah. I don't think it ever gets like that in America. But yeah, if you have cases, where there's pipes not working, yeah, you do need to spend some money on your infrastructure. But
exactly.
in some cases, you'll see a perfectly good building that's 10 years old being torn down to get a new building. It's like, okay, why did you do that? I mean, you go to a college, it's funny. You'll always see a mix of old buildings and new buildings, and some of the
Yeah.
buildings, they kind of treat them as sacred. We can't remodel that building. We got to keep it the way it is. But yeah, but I know exactly what you mean. Not to mention
Yeah. Yeah.
there's, uh,
That's one of the inefficiency problems. As to what you say about tenure, yeah, we have. When I said that universities are controlled by the teachers, actually I mean the tenured teachers. That's
yeah,
other of the issues. In the UVA, for example, around 80% of the teachers, the teacher body, don't get paid to do their job, or are basically like volunteers who do it for the good of the community or for ad honorem, so to speak. Um, Most of them barely get paid like benefits,
yeah,
and 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 some of them don't even have political rights. Like they don't vote for teacher representatives. Actually, this is one of the things I address in my article. We have what we call the doctoral aristocracy, like this very small 20% of tenured PhDs who are basically impossible to remove, who are impossible to demand to do their job, who are not accountable to any education plan or any budget constraints imposed by the university itself, much less the national government. And this creates this sort of paradox where the universities are carved out into little fiefdoms. One of the things I say in my article is the universities in Argentina, there's not a national university system because there's nothing systematic about it. Uh, every student, whenever you get in with a new professor, it's new rules, new arbitrary constraints imposed by that specific professor, because no one can force him to abide by any rules. And these are the people who actually do control the universities. And most of them don't have work or any prospects outside of the university system, so they get very conservative about the status quo. They are people who maybe can't find a job in the private sector. Or, for example, in my university, one of the things you have in my law school is that many of them are attorneys, like district attorneys or judges or people who work in the judicial system, and they hold professorships because it's prestigious, because it gives you extra points on the examinations for the bureaucratic positions,
Yeah.
but they don't actually teach. And when they do teach, they don't actually have like training to teach right. So maybe they know the stuff, but they don't know how to teach the stuff, if you get me. Um, that and that's one of the main issues. Like there's a serious lack of professionalization and accountability on the professor side of the equation.
Yeah. So we've got a case where now the professors are out there protesting, and I guess they've been protesting on the street. It apparently got a little violent too. Is that right or not?
Yeah, that's mainly in Buenos Aires and the big cities where
Yeah.
you have the sort of more flamboyant demonstrations, like clashes between the police and
Yeah.
the teachers or the students. In most places, I would say, in most places, obviously, most of the population and most of the students are in Buenos Aires, so you can't disregard that. But most
Yeah.
places all over the country, which are somewhat of a minority, you won't find that. Here in my city, for example, the humanities faculty was taken over by students, and I think it's still occupied as of today, a couple days into the conflict. But other faculties and schools, which are like law or administration or business, uh, just kept on doing their business as usual. So it largely depends on how politicized your specific field and degree is. Um, I don't know if that's the stereotype in America also, but especially humanities,
Yeah.
literature, philosophy students over here are very politicized. And the joke is that they will usually like do these flamboyant marches on the street or protests to say we shouldn't owe money to the IMF or whatever,
Yeah.
but they won't get actually involved in any of the issues that affect their local interests. Just they want to be the signal
Yes.
into the omnicause of the international left.
Yeah. It's yeah. And since we're it's yeah, and since we're going to talk about protesting here, I'm going to just temporarily share this here, and I want everybody to see this. Just this is from Google Maps. This overhead view on the right, you see the Casa Rosada, and then there's the
Mhm.
Plaza de Mayo. The Casa Rosada is the president's house, and there's this nice big open space where you can go protest, and you don't have to block traffic at all.
Mhm.
Who knows? Maybe Milei will even come out and talk to you. But that's a beautiful little green space. It's probably the size of a large football field in America, and you can go out there and protest it. You will not block traffic right in front of Milei's house. So I just want to make sure everybody knows that. So when you see these protesters being arrested, it's because they're interfering with the traffic. But anyway, so yeah, that's so. Well, how do you think this is going to play out? Because he's probably got to have. He probably doesn't have much of the legislature on his side here, and
Uh, yeah, I think the big legislative battle has been won because he managed to veto the bill
yeah,
that wanted to increase funding for universities, and he actually did manage to get a coalition just big enough so that they couldn't overturn his veto. I don't think we live in a very executive supremacist country, so I don't think Congress has ever managed to successfully overturn a presidential veto here in Argentina.
yeah,
Now, the two big questions is this occupation of the faculties. Will it go on? I don't think so. I think it's just a tantrum post
yeah,
facto. Like to be effective, they would have to uh, have begun these sort of violent direct actions before the veto. Now it's just it's done. The law is vetoed. You can do anything. So they will wear out with time. The government is very good at winning the sort of wars of attrition against protesters. Um, and as I said, most of the faculties all over the country aren't even protesting. It's just a little very politicized ones.
Okay.
The discussion will be when the budget for next year, 2025, comes up. We'll see how Milei and his coalition manage to put audit requirements into the new university finance law.
Yeah, that will be interesting. And maybe more importantly, Eloy, I recently saw those numbers that Milei has a 78% approval rating with voters under 30. Could we possibly see a gradual rebellion where the students are all going to say, screw this socialism bullshit, we're capitalists? And maybe in 30 or 40 years, they actually will take over the colleges and turn them capitalist. I mean, it would be amazing to see that happen, but is that actually possible? I mean,
First of all, because of the unrestricted access to universities,
yeah,
you will still have a lot of the university demographics are never going to be a perfect reflection of the out of university demographics. People who come to study are usually more left leaning, or at least they have a vested interest. They are right leaning people who have a vested interest in preserving a system that gives them their paycheck. That's
yeah,
just human nature.
yeah. It doesn't
What I
have to
think
be that way because
doesn't have to be the way.
Marxism is not popular with economics professors.
Yeah.
But yeah, sorry.
But one of the things I think it's happening that didn't happen before because there were student protests back in April is that now when the opposition has turned a little more violent and started to like obstruct the streets and obstruct the universities, most like I presume in most countries all over the world, most of the student body isn't extremely politicized. They just want to finish their degree and do their work and whatever. And they can't do it right now. They can't take their exams or go to class because the faculty is occupied by protesters. So I think the libertarian student movement, which was very embryonic up to last year, now is finally getting some steam. Like, oh, we're the ones who are actually in favor of uh, accountability and quality and your right to go to class within the education system. This is a sort of unified discourse they didn't have last year or even back in April. You will still see some, as I said, class polarization and gender polarizations. But I think Milei is over time. That's why I said this was a war of attrition, normalizing the idea that universities should be fiscally responsible. And you see a lot of moderates, even from the left wing, coming out of the woodwork in ways they didn't like 10 years ago, saying, no, actually, I'm not in favor of this government, but I do think we should be more accountable. We should try to make spending more efficient. We should try to have the students finish their degrees. That's why the university exists. So I think we'll not see that in the short term, but over the next 4 years, I actually think there might be a like a market share, so to speak, in the universities for a student representation that's more based on accountability and fiscal responsibility.
Yeah. Do you see a lot of protests down there? I mean, let's say, for example, Bolsonaro came to speak at the University of Buenos Aires. Would there be a bunch of left-wing students out there protesting him or not?
Probably yes, but probably wouldn't get anywhere. Like
Okay.
These things have happened even when left-wing presidents have come, like Evo Morales from Bolivia or Rafael
Yeah.
Correa from Ecuador. But as I said, most students aren't politicized. Like even, for example, there's a very big left-leaning prison abolition
Yeah.
judge in my country called Zaffaroni,
Yeah.
and I despise his political views, but
Okay.
he's a very great academic and very
Okay.
good
Yeah.
jurist. So if he comes to speak in my university, I want to go listen to him. So again, there's a very uh, intense minority who are actually doing the protest.
Yeah. Well, often it's the rich kids, because the average and middle class kids are usually doing school and they might be working part time,
Yeah.
and they don't really have time for this, which is why it seems to happen at the more elite schools. I got to ask before we go to, are at least on some of the more elite schools here in America, are you seeing a lot of protests about what's happening with the Middle East?
Not really. Like you see the sort of symbolic stuff, like
Yeah.
they hang how you call it, like flags of Palestine and that
Yeah.
sort of thing. But what you need to understand is also Argentina and the universities, particularly, have a very large Jewish presence.
Yeah.
So there that sort of counteracts. I'm writing an article right now, actually, about the activities of Hezbollah and how Argentina plays into the conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, you see some sort of shows of solidarity with the again the international leftist ovnikos, but I wouldn't say that's as intense as it gets over there.
Maybe they're just everybody's a little more civil. I mean, you can have, one group stand on one side of the courtyard and the other group stands on the other side of the courtyard, and they just both stand there and chant, but they're just kind of saying, okay, you're there, we're here, and they just can stand there and scream and shout peacefully. But I mean, fisticuffs don't have to happen, but
Yeah, I think it's mostly that it's very segmented. Like if you go
yeah.
to again the humanities school, you know people are going to be pro-Palestine. You know there's going to
Yeah.
be a lot of feminist symbology, etc. So I know I have lots of friends who are centrist or right wing, and they go to study history or philosophy or whatever, and they just push through it and they don't get involved. And I suppose some of the most left-leaning people are not as comfortable here in law school because we're not as politicized. But that's just one of the things that
Okay.
happen.
Yeah. It sounds like American schools are more politicized, and also I assume men use the men's room and women use the women's room.
Depends. My university has unisex bathrooms, for example.
Okay. Okay. Well, that I think this has been a good talk, Eloy. Where can we
Yeah.
find you out there on the web?
It's at Eloy Vera Bell, like you
Yes.
see it written down here. So if you're interested in my opinions about Milei, Argentina, and all sort of stuff, I expect you over
Yes.
there.
Well, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, go buy my novel Escape from the Village, check out my Substack, and go to buymeacoffee.com. And maybe, this will be the free market revolution will start with Argentina and it will spread around South America, which it needs to. I love South America, so we'll see what happens. But thank you, Eloy. I'm Chris Baker. We're out.